I don't know about you guys, but I feel like the player base has gotten somewhat desensitized by new champions having crazy mechanics or overloaded kits as of late. After what happened in 2020 and 2021, new releases like Zeri, Renata, Bel'Veth, and Neela have instilled immense dread in us as we contemplated how they would throw the game for a loop, only for us to not really care too much about them once they were finally brought in, maybe with the exception of Zeri. I remember making a big deal out of how broken some of them would be, but there doesn't seem to be as big of an outcry against Neela and Bel'Veth as there was for Viego and Ksante. Either that or it's just me not paying attention to Reddit that much. That being said, a new champion's on the way and we're back to college dissertation length ability descriptions, but after taking a good look at Ksante, I had two things that came to mind. First, tank meta. Second, Vandal is going to have a lot of fun making content breaking this champion. So welcome back everyone to my 200 years of well-designed first impression series featuring the pride of Nazuma, Ksante. Is it Nazuma? I need to check. In true modern champion fashion, Ksante's gameplay revolves around a gimmick. Before looking into that though, I want to take a look at the hybrid class choice for him on the wiki. Ksante is designated as a Warden and a Skirmisher, a very antithetical combination to say the least. Skirmishers pride themselves on relentless attack, possessing extreme damage output and dueling potential, while Wardens are the paragon of defense and protection, prioritizing disruption and party-saving utility above all else. We've had interesting class pairings before, like someone who's a marksman and enchanter, but for every dual class champion, you could conceivably understand how they would work together. A Skirmisher and Warden couldn't be further apart from each other. One's a solo carry damaging class, the other is a team guarding protective class. Then again, Poppy and Shen are considered Wardens in spite of their rather strong damage output and mobility in single combat. Additionally, we have shapeshifters like Gnar who switch from a hit and runner to an all-in raid boss. Perhaps Ksante doesn't embody the gameplay traits of the two classes in a literal sense, more in playstyle. Either way, we have a lot of reading to go through, so let's find out where that difference lies, starting with his passive, Dauntless Instinct. Each time he damages an enemy with an ability, they get tagged with a mark for 4 seconds. The next basic attack against a marked target deals bonus physical and max health damage. Pretty standard passive, nothing we haven't seen before. Leona, Lux, and Viego have something similar where you use an ability first, then weave in attacks in between. What comes next is where you'll see his theme. When All Out is activated, consuming an enemy mark deals increased damage based on his armor and magic resist while converting the max health portion into max health true damage. Those of you who have been following me for a while know how much I detest max health true damage. It's the only form of damage in the game that has no counter. Neither health or resistances can protect you from max health true damage. That being said, this only happens while in all out stance, and the numbers are very small. Fiora can do over 15% with 1 vital in the late game, whereas Ksante does 1/10 of that amount, so it's probably nothing to worry about. With all that affecting the rest of his kit, we're gonna skip his basic abilities for now and go straight to his ultimate. The attack itself is quite interesting. There's a lot of wording to go through, but try to imagine Ksante's ultimate as Set's Showstopper combined with Zeri's Spark Surge Wall Dash. Basically, he charges towards the target enemy champion, and if he slams them into a wall, both of them travel through that wall until they reach the other side, upon which he enters all out stance for 20 seconds. During this time, he loses roughly half his max health and a significant amount of base armor and magic resist, if not all of it. To compensate for that, he gains a huge amount of attack damage equal to a portion of his bonus armor and magic resist, and increased Omnivamp equal to a portion of his bonus health, essentially converting his defense into offense. This is cool. Now that I think about it, even though League of Legends derived a lot of champion ideas from archetypal RPG or D&D style games, they have yet to release a character who alternates between an attack and defense stance. We have plenty of ranged to melee champions like Nidalee, Elise, and Jace, but no tank to DPS champion. Although I'm sure there was a good reason for that. It would be awfully troublesome to balance someone who has incredible resilience when they need to and can transform that into sheer force whenever convenient. So now it makes more sense why he's a hybrid between a Warden and a Skirmisher. He's like Aegislash from Pokemon. Unfortunately, those of you who play competitive Pokemon during Gen 6 and 7 know exactly how broken Aegislash was. Moving on though, let's talk about Nitofo Strikes. At least I think that's how you pronounce it. I apologize if that's incorrect. His Q is a forward thrust attack that deals physical damage and slows all targets hit. If the attack lands, he gains a stack. At 2 stacks, his next Q turns into a knockup that pulls enemies towards his location. Sound familiar? This is a mirror image of Yasuo and Yone's Qs. 2 casts empower the 3rd cast to have bonus effects. The resemblance is even shared in the cast time and cooldown. Yasuo and Yone's Qs attack faster and reduce their cooldown based on attack speed instead of the usual CDR, while Ksante's Q attacks faster based on his bonus health and scales the cooldown based on armor and magic resist. While in all out stance, the base cooldown is reduced by 1 second, so it becomes a 0.75 second cooldown ability. But to compensate, he loses the slow, just so that he doesn't permaslow you. I'm gonna say right now, I'm really glad they're reverting Sunfire Aegis back into Sunfire Cape since, oh my god, Ksante with Sunfire with an ability that has less than a 1 second cooldown that resets your auto attack timer, this guy is gonna roast everyone alive. So in a vacuum, this ability is perfectly fine. In exchange for not having as explosive of an engage as Vanguards, Wardens are blessed with a bit more consistent damage output. Shen, Tahm Kench, Poppy, they all have pretty solid damage one-on-one, but I will say this. While Natofo Strikes as an ability is a good concept, I'm growing tired of how many champions have straight line attacks with their Q. I understand there's only so many ways a champion's main damaging tool can be dealt, but going through every melee champion in the past 2 years, Nila's Q is a forward straight line attack, Bel'Veth's W is a straight line attack, Viego's Q is a forward thrust, Rel's Q is a forward thrust, Yonna's Q is a forward thrust, Qiyana's Q is a straight line skill shot. A lot of new champions just have straight line attacks, which isn't bad per se, but it's starting to get kind of monotonous. I wish they were a bit more creative with how a champion deals damage. For example, Shen's Twilight Assault is a very unique way of designing empowered auto attacks. Aatrox's 3 different Q hitboxes make for an interesting interaction. If they're gonna do straight line skill shot attacks, they could have at the very least added some kind of mechanic like how they did with Echo, where Time Winder expands at the end and slowly continues outward before returning back to him. I digress though, just a bit of a nitpick on my part. Moving on, his W is Pathmaker, behaving very much like Aurelia's Defiant Dance, where he stands his ground, becoming displacement immune and gaining damage reduction during that time. Upon release, he charges forward, stunning and pushing back enemies with him. Both the damage and stun duration are based on the charge time. I should mention that Ksante's ability scaling is all bonus armor, magic resist, and health, meaning he still retains the power of his abilities when in all-out stance because he loses base stats, not bonus stats. Speaking of which, it's very possible for Ksante to gain 100% damage reduction in the late game. All he needs is around 200 bonus armor, 200 bonus MR, and just over 3000 bonus health to gain 75%. So towards the late game, a well-timed Pathmaker can make you invincible for a short time. While in all-out stance, he loses the knockback and stun but deals bonus damage and gains more dash range and speed. Meanwhile, his defensive charge can last for 2 seconds and has more damage reduction, so it becomes even easier to get 100%. Also, when you initially enter all-out stance, Pathmaker's cooldown is reset, so you can press W, then Alt, then W again, allowing for up to 3 seconds of total damage immunity, which is crazy. Situational defense, as frustrating or overpowered as it may be at times, is relatively fair in my opinion. It puts the onus on the player to judge when is the best time to use their protective ability for the most value. One of my favorite champions is Pantheon, and I love Aegis Assault's design. It's 1.5 seconds of total damage invincibility, but only from sources facing a shield. Obviously, it can lead to some really stupid counterplay like blocking Garen or Darius ult despite being true damage, but it's better than giving him ridiculous amounts of HP, armor, and MR. Wardens are also meant to have situational defense, as opposed to Vanguards having conventional durability. When you think of Braum, Poppy, Shen, their defense is less about face tanking damage and more about countering certain types of damage. Braum's Unbreakable, Poppy's Steadfast Presence, Shen's Spirit Refuge, stuff like that. So Pathmaker's counter defense is well thought out. The numbers might have to go up or down a bit, but I mean, that's every champion nowadays, am I right? And finally, we have Footwork, a refreshingly simple ability with only a few sentences for a description. It's a free targeted short-range dash that gives him a shield, so basically the first cast of Silas's E before they took the shield away. But when you click on an allied champion, the dash range is increased and he gives him a shield too. Okay, so this is the Warden part. I was wondering when they would talk about the party aspect of his kit. When going all out, the dash speed and range is increased and he can dash through walls. I like this, by the way. I mean, I'd rather they just not give every champion 40 million dashes, but if they're adamant about it, I appreciate how they're making it so that dashes can only go over walls if a certain condition is met, or sometimes not at all. The biggest advantage of having mobility is that you can dash over walls, not only saving an immense amount of time traveling through the jungle, but also giving you an escape option, especially if the enemy team can't chase after you with a dash of their own. So they're making certain dashes unable to cross terrain like Viego's W, Bel'Veth's Q while in base form, and now Ksante's E while in base form. I don't mind these kinds of dashes. Besides, he's part Skirmisher, so it is to be expected. At first glance, I don't consider him to be that ridiculous. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of text on his abilities, but functionally it's more or less quite digestible. There is something I believe was executed rather poorly though, and that's how they laid the foundation for his hybrid playstyle. Ksante's base form is tank, while his all-out form is attack, which is how it should be. If you're gonna release a character who can alternate between shield and sword, it's usually better to keep the sword under wraps and to have the shield be the base. Whatever stance is considered safer. That's why Jace, Nidalee, Elise, and Nar's base forms are ranged. Here's the problem. Ksante's base abilities were designed to play out like a skirmisher. Skirmishers have very high DPS and 1 or 2 situational defensive tools. Comparing Ksante to Riven, both passives enhance their auto attack damage after using abilities. They each have a main damaging Q whose third hit is a knock-up. Both of their E's are dashes that give a shield. Ksante's W is a more brutish version of Irelia's W, but either way, his base kit is very skirmisher heavy. The premise of going all out is to strip his basic abilities of the slow crowd control tankiness and transform them into attack, but to me it feels like all out is just an afterthought with some extra effects. More like a Shyvana dragon form where her abilities are expanded upon and empowered than an R transformation where his abilities are changed to suit that of a vanguard or diver. It feels to me like they were always going to design him as a skirmisher but in the guise of a tank. Don't get me wrong, the abilities individually are all fine, it's just that I was expecting him to be more like Gnar than Shyvana. Let me explain. Gnar's an interesting shapeshifter because not only is his transformation involuntary, but his abilities are repurposed. Mini Gnar's Q tosses a boomerang that deals a bit of damage to all enemies hit and refunds a portion of the cooldown if he catches it. It's ostensibly meant to be a neutral harass tool. Mega Gnar's Q is also a long-range skill shot, but instead of throwing a boomerang, he slams you with a massive boulder that deals way more damage and slows her way longer. But it doesn't return to you, so if you want to pick it up, you have to likely get in range of your opponent and fight. Same goes for Hop and Crunch. Mini Gnar's Hop is meant to make you more slippery through being able to bounce twice if he lands on a target, further emphasizing a hit and run playstyle. Mega Gnar's Crunch is a massive ground slam that hits all enemies and deals more damage. His Q and E are conceptually the same no matter what form he's in, but the effects are tailor-made to the change in stances. Comparatively, Ksante's stance change seems to only be a superficial thing. He presses his ult, loses health, armor and magic resist, and gains AD and battle healing. That's about it. There isn't as noticeable of a change in playstyle when he transitions from one stance to another as I would have liked. Base passive does bonus damage after using an ability. All out passive just increases that damage, basically unchanged. Base Natofo Strikes is a 3-strike Q that knocks up on the 3rd Q. All out Natofo Strikes is a faster 3-strike Q that knocks up on the 3rd Q. Sure, you lose the slow on it, but that was because his Q would go from a 1.75 second cooldown to a 0.75 second cooldown, letting him permaslow you for 80%, making it impossible to run away from him. Base footwork is a dash that grants a shield, all out footwork is a faster and longer dash that can travel through walls that grants a shield. The only ability that has a noticeable difference in function is Pathmaker, forfeiting the knockback and stun in favor of more damage. The damage reduction is increased, but that's understandable given he's a lot squishier, so having more protection is a necessary evil. I'm not trying to argue that Ksante should have been a shapeshifter. There's a reason none of the prior shapeshifters alternate between tank and DPS, only range and melee. If Jace was as tanky as Darius in hammer form, that would be absurdly broken. He's squishy regardless of whether he's in hammer or cannon form. What I am trying to argue is that it would have embodied the duality of Warden and Skirmisher more nicely if they distinguished his tank stance and attack stance. Right now his all-out stance comes off as more of an extension of his abilities, not a transformation, even though his tonfas literally switch from blunt weapons to blades. From what I can gather, Ksante's goal in a team fight is to use all out on his target of choice, forcing them over a wall and isolating them from the rest of their team, to which Ksante battles them one-on-one while the other 8 players 4v4 each other. I don't think it's going to be easy to insect with this ability unless your team is super Giga Brain Chad. Skirmishers are duelists after all, so having this kind of ability actually makes perfect sense. You want to face an enemy champion 1v1 since that's where you're at your best. In terms of what he wants to accomplish, Ksante has a clear vision. He plays Warden in teamfights and waits for the right opportunity to single out a priority target and duel them away from the rest of their team. Alternatively, if he finds a decent flank, he can deliver an enemy champion to his team very effectively, even if it's a tad bit more difficult to do than on Azir or Lee Sin. There is one more thing I want to bring up. Before writing this script, I was watching Scooch's first impressions on Ksante, and he brought up a good point.
I am wildly disappointed that his transformation gimmick is just press R. Pressing R, it's just like, it's not creative. We already have Jace, we have Nidalee, we have Elise, we have so many characters where they just press R and then they're different. When I heard about Ksante, I thought that they were going to do something very creative with him. And fortunately, they did. He's a very creative character. The only negative thing I really have to say about him is I think his transformation gimmick is they did it so boring.
I agree wholeheartedly. All out feels less like the focal point of the champion and more of a, oh hey, let me just go Super Saiyan real quick. Ksante is a very cool concept that raises interesting questions. He's for all intents and purposes the first hybrid attack and defense champion in the game, but the attack part feels like he was shoehorned in at the last second. Hypothetically, if we were to take out the stance change, Ksante would still feel like Ksante, the Q, the W, the E, the ultimate. The fact that we could delete all out and the rest of his properties, and Ksante's gameplay would still be recognizable from a theoretical standpoint shows how inconspicuous all out really is. You know, if you took away Jace's hammer form or Nidalee's cougar form, something would feel very wrong, but to me, Ksante's base form is more than adequate for a champion. It's not like half of his power budget is in base and half of his power budget is in all out. But yeah, overall, I'm interested in seeing what he has to offer. Good idea, could have been executed a bit better. I think they should have just given more definitive attention to his all-out stance and made it so that there would be actually different abilities. That's gonna be it for today though, so let me know your thoughts on Ksante in the comments down below. If you agree or disagree with my points. Aside from that, if you enjoyed today's video, it would be awesome if you'd like to like and subscribe. Consider following me on Twitter at Vars, joining my Discord server, and if you'd like to support me further, check out my Patreon page. By donating, you get access to benefits for all 3 of my channels, Vars, Vars 2, and Vars 3. Till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.